we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start because I'm the least interesting bit, um, but I do want to be mindful of the time as folks come in. But on behalf of Chapel Hill Public Library, I'm Molly. I'm the coordinator of the Community History Program here, and I want to welcome you all to this evening's very special event where we're going to watch American Agitators together and then have some conversation around that. I'm here with two of my most excellent coworkers, Robin, who will be running our uh, live stream of this event. We have twice as many people joining us online as we have in person. And then Luis, who is taking photographs and being all around helpful. So thank you to them. A couple of quick housekeeping things as always. You think your phone is off, but I know there's at least one person in here whose phone is not off. Don't let it be you. The library closes at 8 o'clock. If we are still here 10 minutes before 8, you may hear an announcement. Come into this room. It does not apply to us. The only thing that will kick us out of here is our will to leave. So, let's see. Restrooms are in the just around the corner. And on this table over here, Robin's handing out, we've got a few things. I'm going to let Cori speak about one of them, but there are a couple of flyers for some upcoming programs that you may be interested in. You can grab one, you can take a picture, whatever you want to do. If you like this kind of programming, please support the Friends of Chapel Hill Public Library. All of the funds for tonight's program came from Friends of the Chapel Hill Public Library. So that is the best way to support your library. We're not getting money from other places right now. I'm just going to be real with you. So it's really important. So huge thanks to our friends and to the local people who support them. And also thank you all for braving this bitter cold to be here with us in person tonight. You all have me thinking of the good people of Minnesota and the cold that they're experiencing there. And I wanted to share just a little bit from something I read this week from journalist Lydia Polgreen in a column in the New York Times. Some of you may have seen it. But she wrote, quote, "One thing that has irked me is how so many call the people out on the streets in Minnesota protesters. Yes, they are motivated by an urge to protest what is happening in their communities. And yes, protesting is an important act of citizenship. But what I saw in Minneapolis is better described as organizing and concerted action. It is an important distinction because so much of what is happening is invisible. People engaging in a form of neighborhood watch, walking vulnerable kids to school to shield them from immigration and customs enforcement, church groups organizing food parcels for families too afraid to leave home, community groups using encrypted messaging to compile spreadsheets of suspected ICE vehicles and activity. Others are logging and archiving endless amounts of evidence of ICE atrocities. This is the product of deep community organizing, not merely spontaneous actions driven by immediate anger." And I think that's why we're here tonight, to think about what organizing looks like locally. And now I'd like to turn the mic over to Dr. Lloyd Kramer, really the brains behind this evening. Lloyd is professor, y'all know who Lloyd is, professor emeritus history, former director of Carolina Public Humanities, who is our partner on tonight's program. A leader in bringing scholarship to the community, bringing the community in conversation with the university. He continues to play that role now and hopefully far into the future. Lloyd.
Well, thank you, Molly. I am so happy to be here. This is well organized. That's what organizing is all about. So I want to welcome all of you in the room. Thank you for coming to this event and taking time on a cold night. And as Molly said, we have a lot of people online. They're coming in. We have 120 people registered for the online participation. So this is how organizing works. You throw a stone in a pond and it spreads all over the country. And here we are. As Molly said, I'm Lloyd Kramer from Professor Emeritus at UNC, and I'm pleased that I could be part of this event. I first saw this movie last August, and I said, this is something we should see in Chapel Hill. So I'm happy we're doing it, and John Heffernan, the producer, executive producer, is with us tonight. As you know, all of us know, we're living in extremely challenging times for American democracy. It's hard to avoid deep anxieties, deep despair, even paralysis. But when we think about public life, we have to remember that people in other times have faced equally great challenges, different challenges, and this film will remind us of how people like Fred Ross never gave up their hopes or their action in dark times during the 20th century. So I thank Molly for helping to organize this, and I thank Robin. I also want to thank the Friends of the Chapel Hill Public Library for making this possible, and I especially want to thank the wonderful team at Carolina Public Humanities. And there's a brochure. I'm no longer at CPH, but my heart beats fast when I see this brochure. And this is a co-sponsor for tonight's event. I also want to thank the advisory committee that helped to develop this program, Tom McQuiston, Paul Benici, Bob Korstad, Jacqueline Hall, and Bev Ortiz, who were all part of the discussion to make this happen. We're going to look at a shorter version of the film, about a 55-minute version, and then after that, we're going to move directly into a community conversation, which will be led by Cori Greer-Banks, Carolina Greer-Banks. I'm sorry. My gosh. Here I'm looking at the thing and I got it back up. Cori Greer-Banks, who's the director of Carolina K-12. We have Sylvia Zapata, who's the executive director of Student Action with Farmworkers. We have John Heffernan, the executive producer, and Melinda Wiggins, director of Labor South. But as we begin, I'm going to ask Cori to say a couple of words. Cori, you have to use this.
Thank you. Hey, guys. So I just want to direct your attention to your program that you received, and hopefully everybody received one, because on the back, you have a little assignment. I heard some grumbles in there like, oh gosh, we have homework. Yeah. I have been a teacher for 24 years before stepping into this role as director of Carolina K-12. So my ears are tuned in to grumbles about homework. You don't have homework. If you don't want to write anything down, you don't have to. But I know after, some of you have worked all day, or you've been doing errands, or maybe this is the first time you have come out of your house because you've been snowed in, and you're like, wow, things are still alive out here. All right. So whatever the case may be, we're glad you're here. But when you're watching a long documentary, sometimes you forget points that you want to make in a panel discussion. Hence the viewer's guide. And so I have divided it up into major historical eras that you will see referenced in the film. And if there is something that kind of inspires you, or a note, or something that might challenge you, you may want to jot it down. Maybe it feels connected to 2026. A lot of it will. All right. But before the film begins, I want you to think to yourself, when you hear the word agitator, what comes to mind? Don't say any names. Don't say any names. But when you hear the word agitator, what comes to mind? And if you have a writing utensil, you can write what comes to mind right there in that space. And I'll ask you some of your thoughts, your visions after the film is over. All right. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with you guys today. All right.
All right, we're going to start the movie. Or by we, I mean Robin.
Then what are we here to do? If y'all don't get it, if they don't get it, if y'all don't get it,
we're no longer going to sit back and be the little guy without a voice. Right. We're forming this union.
That's right.
He was always on the lookout for men and women who had to do something about injustice.
He says, you got to get the people to vote. Fred taught us that politicians are our servants.
Hola, Tutu-Six! Buenos dias a todos! How's everybody doing? Are we ready to get out and early vote?
I didn't like him because he wore boots, and we in Boyle Heights really didn't trust anyone that was wearing Texas boots.
There was this tall Anglo running the meetings. His name was Fred Ross. He would sit us down, teaching us about how to go out and talk to people, how to listen.
He gave us the tools in this simplicity of his approach. Stick-to-itiveness, doggedness, stay cool and collected, and move forward. And if there's a setback, that's all right. Go around it, go under it, go over it, and keep going.
I could never understand why he would take the time to meet with one person at a time, but I realized that this was a way of getting to know you as a person.
This was a century that exposed the ugly American. Fred Ross, to the total contrary point, was the beautiful American. He was the human American. He was the American who came out to the barrios, came out to the labor camps, and put himself on the line.
Someone once said that an organizer is part missionary, part educator, and part agitator. And my dad had all three of those qualities to the nth degree.
What is it that Fred Sr. said? Social arsonists, right? Like lighting people on fire. It's like, look, this is what it's about.
At first glance, Fred Ross seemed an unlikely candidate to become a labor organizer and civil rights advocate. Born in San Francisco, he was raised in a middle-class neighborhood near downtown Los Angeles. He grew up in a divisive era. This was a time of strong nativist and xenophobic sentiment. Ross was not immune to the events that swirled around him in those years. The Great Depression, the rise of Hitler in Germany, and the reformist presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt.
And it is my belief that voting during the...
It was at USC where he met Eugene Woolman, a brash young activist who gave Ross a focus to his political views. Woolman became his best friend. Shortly after their graduation in 1936, Woolman set off for Spain.
And it was at USC, one of his best friends ended up going off to Spain to join the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which was a group of Americans who were fighting fascism. And his friend never came back. His friend was a casualty in Spain.
Woolman's friendship and his death would forever mark Ross and dramatically influence the direction of his life. You know, he was a humanist. He treated everyone with respect and a sense of equality, you know, regardless, again, gender or race, whatever, you know. He was a very upstanding, I think, American. To me, he represented the ideals of the United States, you know, of America made real, you know, embodied in this man, born in San Francisco in 1910, right? The country was in the middle of the Great Depression. All across the land, factories were shut down. Millions had lost their jobs, farms, and homes.
He got a job with the Farm Security Administration under Roosevelt in the late 1930s. And this is during the Dust Bowl exodus. And so what they call the Dust Bowl refugees from Oklahoma and Arkansas began arriving by the thousands in California.
President Roosevelt pledges over $1 million, the equivalent of $22 million today, to feed and house the migrants. But despite good intentions, there is a backlash against the Dust Bowl migrants. They're called dogs and shiftless trash.
Of course, Steinbeck wrote about them in Grapes of Wrath, and one of the camps that Steinbeck wrote about was a camp that my father became the camp manager of in the late 1930s. He reinstituted what they call a camp council, a small d democratic council made up of farm workers, of the migrant workers, who would meet on a regular basis and make decisions about how to run the camp, how to improve services, and so forth. And then to get to know the campers better, he would go to their doors and just have coffee with them and get to know them and listen to their story.
The importance of just talking to people one at a time, instead of trying to call them all together in a mass meeting over at the hall, you know, and get it over with fast and forget about it. I was really devoting time and energy to getting to know the people, getting help them to know me, and creating some understanding between us.
The Farm Security Administration camps were not enough to meet the need. Large numbers of farm workers and their families ended up in growers' camps, often in horrific conditions. President Roosevelt had pledged to end the Depression and put America back to work, but millions were still suffering. Throughout the Depression, migrant farmers in California fought for decent wages and working conditions. Mexicans and Okies joined forces in a series of strikes during the 1930s.
And during this period, the UCAPAWA, the United Cannery and Agricultural Workers, organized a strike. And even though he was working for the federal government, my father supported the strike and allowed the strikers to meet in the property, and the growers went nuts. They hated it, and they tried to get rid of him.
With the publication of Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath and Carrie McWilliams' expose Factories in the Fields, Kern County had become the focus of all that was wrong with the treatment of farm workers. On April 4th, 1940, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt arrives in Bakersfield.
Eleanor Roosevelt came out to see the conditions of farm workers, so my father and some of the leaders of the camp showed her around. So it was a historic period, and he was learning that skill of carefully listening and getting to know people and building relationships and supporting small d democracy.
My job was to go around to all the camps in the state and get them to set up an educational program for the migrants. It was while I was doing that that I came to the camp up there in Marysville and met her.
At the Marysville camp, he meets Frances Gibson. Frances and Fred marry in January 1942.
You know, my mom was active in the civil rights movement. She was the first woman to have a job advocating for poor people up in Sacramento in the mid-30s. She was committed to civil rights and to labor, and they both taught us to fight for the underdog, that you never cross the picket line. That racial prejudice was the worst thing you could have. So growing up, we learned those fundamental lessons from both my mother and my father.
Was carried out by Jap torpedo planes together with dive bombers and horizontal bombers coming in waves.
With the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States entered the war against Japan and Germany. Anti-Japanese hysteria sweeps across the country, particularly along the West Coast. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt issues Executive Order 9066. The order authorizes the removal of persons deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast. 120,000 Japanese are rounded up and sent to prison camps.
How do you justify the incarceration of 120,000 people of one ethnicity, 2/3 of whom were American citizens, without any due process rights? There was no evidence that Japanese Americans presented a threat, as was claimed. That was the justification. So the crime was racial ancestry. The justification was military necessity, now known as national security. Same concept. And the fear was whipped up by politicians. They were very ambitious. They wanted to use a scapegoat. They wanted to get elected. Another factor was the economic interests and the farm interests who resented the success of Japanese Americans.
In the 1940s, nearly half of the working-age Japanese were farmers. Many lost their farms in a land grab by white farmers, often supported by the California Farm Bureau. The Japanese farmers would get an average of 15 cents on the dollar for their farms. The same thing would happen to Japanese-owned enterprises in the cities.
Like almost most Americans at the time, sadly, at first he was supportive of what Roosevelt was doing, thinking that, well, if FDR, the champion of progressive causes, the New Deal, and labor and so forth, if he says there's a military necessity, I guess that's right.
My mother and father were removed from San Francisco. They were notified to sign up to register, so they would be given their family number. The signs were posted in San Francisco, Japantown, where they were living. Shortly thereafter, they were notified that they could bring only what they could carry. It was March, and it was raining the day that they were put on the Greyhound bus. My mother, because she was newly pregnant, she had morning sickness. And so she was pretty miserable. And when they arrived at Tanforan, she was shocked to find that their home away from home was actually a horse stable. They had no idea at all that it would actually lead to them being incarcerated for what would be 4.5 years.
Our parents never talked about it almost. They called them camps. They weren't camps, they were prisons.
In the spring of 1942, the War Relocation Authority hires Ross and sends him to Minidoka, Idaho.
Got to Minidoka, and he realized, wait a second, what we're doing is wrong.
I was just frantic to get out there and help get them out of those horrible camps, you know, concentration camps. So I did. I got transferred to Cleveland. I was a chief relocation officer.
Ross would spend the next 2 years trying to place a limited number of carefully vetted Japanese Americans into factory and clerical jobs. A nearly impossible task. In late 1944, Ross filed for a transfer. He arrived in San Francisco in 1945, just days after the end of the war. He built alliances with local community leaders and unions, but challenges remained.
I think people know Fred has a way of getting people to work with him. And it wasn't easy because it was anti-Japanese all the way.
Ross's days at the WRA were coming to an end. It had been a frustratingly difficult period of his life. He left feeling he could have done more.
So when he was working in the Citrus Belt in the late 40s, the KKK had firebombed the home of the leader of the NAACP. And so the Counselor of Racial Relations asked my father to go in and do a study of what was happening in that area. And in the process, my father got engaged with the community and began to organize. He was doing individual meetings with people. And one night he was meeting with a farm worker, and the farm worker said, well, wouldn't it go a lot faster if I invited some guys from my crew over? They'd be interested. And the light bulb went off, and my father, well, that'd be great. So that was the first house meeting, was with a farm worker who gave my father the idea. And he said, wow, okay. So he asked people at that meeting, would you also do a house meeting like Juan did tonight? And that's how it began to build.
Ross had captured the attention of Saul Alinsky, the influential director of the Industrial Areas Foundation, a social action community-based organization. They would work together a few years later.
Throughout the late 40s and 50s, most schools in California were segregated.
And the reason is because the farm bureaus controlled school boards, and they were afraid that by educating Mexican kids, that they would get jobs out of agriculture. And who was going to pick citrus fruits that were rapidly expanding in California? So they didn't care about the quality of education of the Mexican kids. Fred somehow finagled a pro bono attorney in Los Angeles to get the Mendez family and 3 other Mexican families to put their name on the Mendez versus Westminster School Board of Education. That was in 1946.
Thurgood Marshall, who argued the Brown versus Board of Education, actually came out to California to meet with the folks who were organizing the Mendez case. So the Mendez case came out of that, this kind of grassroots organizing. This is the McCarthy era. Joseph McCarthy was in his prime, going after liberals and progressives and falsely accusing them of being communists, to scare them and to intimidate them and to shut them up. That's the context that my father was organizing in the late 40s and throughout the 50s.
Ross's methods of house meetings and community organizing were beginning to catch fire. Saul Alinsky hires him to work with Mexican Americans in Los Angeles, a long disenfranchised working class community.
Fred used to work for the Industrial Areas Foundation. He actually came to Los Angeles, and together with 2 other men, he formed the Community Services Organization, which was a community group here in Los Angeles that was for the purpose of going out and creating political power and community empowerment of the Latino community.
When Fred first came out, I knew nothing about him except that Saul Alinsky had said that someone was coming out to be helpful. When I met that someone, I didn't like him. And I didn't like him because he wore boots. And we in Boyle Heights really didn't trust anyone that was wearing Texas boots. And my immediate reaction was that this is one fellow that cannot be trusted. But within a period of 24 hours after getting to know him, started to trust him more and more. And the end result, of course, was complete trust in an individual, because he was interested in the community and not interested in himself.
And so they hired him. And by then he had become proficient in the house meeting method, and he put that to work in East LA. They registered 18,000 new voters.
And that model led to the election of the first Latino, Edward Roybal, to the Los Angeles City Council. For the first time, people in the community saw somebody that looked like them, spoke like them, and was like them in a political office. And that began the process that, oh, we can do this.
CSO joined a new coalition of civil rights organizations in Los Angeles that had never worked together, and it began to pay off. Not only with political power.
When the CSO came along, then it provided the structure the leadership and the organization that allowed it to become an ongoing force for expressing the issues and the voice that people needed.
The first major test of CSO's political power came in 1951 in a sensational case known as Bloody Christmas.
On a Christmas Eve night in East LA in '51, 4 young veterans of World War II were picked up around midnight outside the karaoke restaurant in East LA and arrested because they were brown and out late at night. And they were taken to the Hollenbeck police station in Boyle Heights, where there was already 40 or 50 cops drunk, and they were beaten black, blue, and bloody for the next 2 hours until the cement floor was full of blood. And cops had never been prosecuted in LA history. But by this time, the local CSO leaders had registered 18,000 new voters. They'd elected Ed Roybal to become the first LA City Council member from the Mexican-American community in over 100 years. They'd built up this multiracial interfaith alliance, and they had political power. And they put out all the stops to get the district attorney to prosecute these bastards. And they tried them, the jury convicted them, and they were sent off to San Quentin.
We changed the attitude of the police department. And also, I think we changed the attitude of a lot of the politicians. The other major change that took place, the attitude of our own residents beginning to feel that they were part of this society.
It was a method that came out of building the House Being Drive, identifying leaders. And leadership meant, can I get 8 or 10 people in my home? And will they take action after they hear from the organizer? But it's also, it's the discussion at the meeting of someone's home about what they care about. Where are they hurting? Where's the anger? You know, what do they want to do about it? Can they imagine if they organize, what could they accomplish?
And I remember standing in front of Our Lady of Guadalupe Mission with Fred to have what is called a one-on-one meeting with him. I could never understand why he would take the time to meet with one person at a time, but I realized that this was a way of getting to know you as a person, and for me to get to know him as a person. And beyond that, to realize it was a way of building trust, of knocking down suspicions about what was a white Anglo doing in Salsipuedes, you know, what was he up to?
In June of '52, my father had a house meeting at the home of Helen and Cesar Chavez.
Cesar agreed to meet, but he agreed to meet as a joke. So he got all his friends together, all these Chicanos, and Cesar had given them all pre-notice that when he finally got tired of hearing what Fred had to say, he was going to take a cigarette and switch it from one hand to the other, and that was going to be the signal to kick his butt out.
And my father wrote that night about the house meeting. He wrote that the first 10 minutes of the meeting, none of my stories are landing. I'm not connecting. Cesar won't even look up from the ground. And then he writes, I remembered that he had told me that he and family and friends had all faced one form of police harassment or brutality or another. And then he realized, I've got to tell the story of Bloody Christmas right now like I've never told it before. And that's when Chavez realized, wow, this is for real, because he had heard about Bloody Christmas.
One thing I do know is that after that meeting in 1952, my dad was convinced and he jumped on board, and right away they got involved in this voter registration campaign, and for 40 days there in East San Jose and Salsipuedes. They registered, 5,000 people, and kind of changed some of the political positioning of residents here in Salsipuedes.
I was so committed to the work, that
Soon after that, they needed another organizer, someone to train. So Fred Ross, who was the West Coast director and working for the CSO, he hired me. And he trained me. I paid attention to what he did, how he did things. I really wanted to learn how to organize, and I think I learned my lesson.
It was 1955. My father was organizing a new chapter of the CSO, Community Service Organization, in Stockton. And someone introduced him to Dolores Huerta's mother, who was a community leader. So Dolores' mother agreed to hold a house meeting, but she set it for a Saturday night.
And when I saw Fred, here was this tall, gangly, angle guy. He had kind of just a regular shirt on, you know, and I think khaki pants. So I was kind of set back a little bit when I saw him, but Fred was very gracious. He introduced himself.
So my father comes to the house meeting, and Dolores is there, and she's a 25-year-old teacher, but no one else comes. But he goes full bore with the house meeting as if it was a packed room. And thank God he did, because Dolores and her mother were both committed to organizing.
He talked about how they brought in street lights and gutters and clinics, and they fixed all of the roads that were broken there in East Los Angeles, and how they were able to do this by getting people to register to vote. And by the time that I met Fred, Ed Roybal, who had been elected to the City Council of Los Angeles, was now the first Latino from California in the U.S. Congress. So this was all just so very, very impressive. So that, you know, I was, you might say, blown away by everything that he showed us.
He understood that unless and until a community built up their voting power, they weren't going to be able to change anything, because the politicians would continue to ignore them. So building power was about dignity, it was about respect, it was about building leadership, and it was about changing the world in that community.
Chavez and Huerta would join Ross at the CSO headquarters in Los Angeles. From this base, they would crisscross California and the Southwest, establishing CSO chapters. In 1959, Chavez became CSO's executive director. He and Huerta made plans to take the organization in a new direction. In 1962, Chavez left the CSO to form the National Farmworkers Association. Dolores Huerta and Fred Ross would soon join him.
And it wasn't until the March to Sacramento Easter of '66 that Caesar asked my dad if he would come back and lead the organizing drive and train organizers in the Valley. House meetings were especially important in the early organizing amongst farm workers because there was so much fear. Organizing in most farm workers' minds meant strikes.
Strike hysteria flares in California. Disorder, swift and violent, attends an attempt to keep guards from entering a cannery plant.
Farm workers losing their jobs or being blacklisted, which meant they couldn't get a job. If you were going to talk to them, you needed to do it in private. He knew you had to go, one person at a time, and to win people's trust. In the summer of 1966, my father invited me to come down to Delano because the Farm Workers Union was in the middle of an epic battle for survival at the DiGiorgio Corporation. What I saw came right out of the Dust Bowl era. There was still a company store, there was company housing, and farm workers were segregated by race, both in the housing and in the crews.
In September 1965, Filipino farm workers under the banner of the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, AWOC, declared a strike against the Delano grape growers. Chavez and the NFWA soon joined them.
He was always on the lookout for men and women who had to do something about injustice. That fire may be dormant, and his job as an organizer, one of his favorite axioms was, a good organizer is a social arsonist who goes around setting people on fire. And he wanted to help set that fire, turn on the switch, provide the spark.
There was this tall Anglo that I hadn't met yet who was running the meetings, and then I found out his name was Fred Ross. And every day before we went out to visit people, he would sit us down. He would start teaching us about how to go out and talk to people, how to listen, and how to communicate the message on why it mattered that they should vote for the Farmworkers Union.
Whenever you had a meeting, and there were lots of meetings, because he wanted the learning curve to be quick but sustainable, there was a lot of responsibility to collect data. Did you keep the list? Did you get another House meeting? How many people did you have out on the picket line? Do you have your voter list? How many people came off the voter list? Part of the craft of organizing, that keeping good records, is a respect for the process.
Well, you know, Fred was a very tough taskmaster, so initially I was intimidated. But he also, while he was tough, he also was encouraged you know, and he was very supportive, and he made sure that you understood that he was working with you to try and analyze what you were doing and how to do it better. When you met with Fred, you know, you learned everything, you know, both from beginning of what you said, what we call the rap. What was your message that we were going to be giving to people when you went out to visit with them? Who were you representing? And why did that matter to that worker? Secondly, that the message was important, but you also, what was more important is listening to people when they responded to what you were saying. And then what you needed to learn with your message is how to give people confidence that if they took action, they actually could make a difference. Fred then spent countless hours with us, teaching us that craft. That stuck in my head, that if you want to win, you have to do the hard work of organizing. There's no shortcuts. You have to go out there and do what needs to get done. And if you win, you'll know why you won. If you lost, you'll also know why you lost.
Someone once said that an organizer is part missionary, part educator, and part agitator. And my dad had all three of those qualities to the nth degree. And he could inspire people, and he could win their trust. And one of the reasons he could win people's trust is that he really listened to people.
Caesar and Dolores, and my father really, were gifted at building multiracial coalitions. Learning how to go to any community, regardless of your own background. So Chavez didn't stick to just organizing Latinos. He made sure, you know, African-American, Asian, students, elderly, union, across the board, Catholic, Jews, interfaith. We didn't have time to make sure we had one of everybody. So we said, okay, you're an organizer, go organize, you know?
I was about 20 years old. I went to East LA with my dad to help register voters for Bobby Kennedy.
We all wanted to see Bobby win. We went to Los Angeles, to East LA. We did East Los Angeles and South Central LA, and even in the Black community.
You're registered to vote. Have you seen it?
The Farmworkers Union organized over 200,000 new voters that year, and that contributed crucially to Kennedy's victory in California.
I want to thank
thank Cesar Chavez, who was here a little earlier. And Bert Corona, who also worked with him, and all of those Mexican Americans who were such supporters of mine. And Dolores Huerta, who is an old friend of mine and has worked with the union, to thank her and tell her how much I appreciate her coming tonight. We have certain obligations.
But Cesar was not there because he had gone back to get Helen. And so I went up to the room to walk down with Bobby and Ethel. And the first thing that struck me is that he had no security.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
He was training organizers with me in the summer of 1988 when he was 78 years old. And that was the last summer that he could do that because he had Alzheimer's the following year. But as long as he could, he was out there patiently going out. Here he was 78, he was going out with organizers to their house meetings and then debriefing them afterward, telling them what went well, what didn't, how they could improve. Organizers who were like 50, 60 years younger than he was were still learning from the master in the summer of '88.
Dicen que no comía, no más se le ven puro tomar. Juran que el mismo cielo se estremecía al oír su llanto. Cómo sufrió por ella que hasta en su muerte la fue llamando.
As we all know, Fred fought more fights and discovered, trained, taught, and worked with more organizers and planted more seeds of righteous indignation against injustice than any man we're likely ever to meet again. For those of you that have never seen it, this is a little book. As you notice, it fits in your pocket. It's designed to be used like everything else Fred did. Page 55 of this useful book, and it's a great definition of an organizer. And I think it's also printed on the back of your program. Fred wrote, "A good organizer is a social arsonist who goes around setting people on fire."
I want to thank you for sharing your father with all of us. I always call Fred my spiritual father because he really was. Fred taught us that politicians are our servants. So if some of the politicians out there wonder why all of us are so irreverent, you can thank Fred Ross for that.
The thing I like most about Fred was there was no bullshit with him. No pretensions, no ego trips, just plain hard work.
This was a century that exposed the ugly American. Fred Ross, to the total contrary point, was the beautiful American. He was the human American. He was the American who came out to the barrios, who came out to the labor camps, and put himself on the line, together with the people that he was trying to organize.
Paloma, ya no me llores.
If you're going to be an organizer, you got to be an optimist. There's no way that you can be a pessimist and be an organizer, because you have to believe that in the inherent power that people have to change their lives. Fred made you believe that you were capable of things that maybe even you weren't sure that you were capable of. And the message was the same whether you were in the union, whether you were in the church or the community organization, that you had rights, that if you participated, you could make a difference. And the way to do it in this society is you vote.
The fundamental act of working people coming together and sharing their stories of what's at stake for them is the building block of what we do as a union. Where I see Fred Ross's legacy touching that of our union is those two basic building blocks, the agitating, the inspiring, and using some basic organizing tools to tap into that thing that you see is inside of all of us. Those casinos on the Strip and in downtown Las Vegas and beyond gross over $1 billion a month in revenue. People are getting very rich off of the work of housekeepers, dishwashers, cooks, bartenders, front and back of the house workers who we represent. Our union represents 300,000 people. Our union is in Las Vegas, majority Latino, deeply Mexican and Mexican American, though not exclusively. We're also the largest African American and Asian American organization in the state. It is majority woman.
It's wonderful to see everybody here. Maravilloso ver todo nuestro hermoso equipo aquí.
I mean, you were in a room with 300 people who have been knocking on doors here in Las Vegas, and there's another 150 people in Reno, Nevada, for 6 months. We believe that in close races, door-to-door canvassing, conversation between two working class people can change the outcome of an election.
Let me introduce another warrior, the first Latino woman, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto.
Buenos dias a todos. How's everybody doing? All right. Are we ready to get out and early vote? That's right. Everyone standing here is part of your family. Because we know that when we work together and we work hard, we lift every family up and give them an opportunity to succeed, right? That's what this is about.
Today, the Fight for 15 has got the same lessons and the same Fred Ross strategies are being implemented.
We're about to get started with the Worker Power Workshop. We got workers from all over, fast food workers, Dollar General workers, healthcare workers. We're here to organize the South, and the first place we start doing that is at our workplaces.
I got 2 children. I can't afford not to come home to my babies. I was robbed in November of 2020. Okay, young guy came in the store, mask over his face, hood on, came straight to my register and says, "Give me everything in your register. I have a gun and I will shoot you." People's safety wasn't taken into consideration, and they were also, they've been taking time from us, basically stealing wages from us. We didn't have any type of sense of security, and we were just tired of it. For anybody that know better, what we do, come into this, build a union, stand strong, demand what you want to stand behind it.
Y'all have the right to speak up and say, no, that's too much.
Well, when we all got together at my house, we sat down, we discussed the issues that we was having with the job. We started talking amongst ourselves. And then we ended up meeting with one of our organizers, and she told us that we could actually do something about it.
We're no longer going to sit back and be the little guy without a voice.
Right. We're forming this union.
That's right.
Yes. Dollar General should be unionized.
Yes.
That way we all can have a platform to speak up. And I'm speaking not just for myself and for this particular Dollar General, but for worldwide.
They did some of our demands. They didn't meet them all, and they thought, oh, okay, well, we met some of their demands. We're gonna just go ahead, they're gonna go ahead and let us slide with it. Nah, it didn't work like that. We still went on strike. We still went out there. That their biggest day, which is Saturday, and we held up their business. Customers came out, joined us. Some of them left. So we did what we wanted, what we came to do, and we got the store manager fired. So we won victory that day. Even though they retaliated, I'm still good. I'm not going to even let that stop me. I'm still come out here, fight, stand behind whoever want to strike their store, get their demands met. I'm with them 100%.
Well, you know, organizing is organizing, right? Whether you're organizing people to go vote, organizing people to change conditions at their job sites, or conditions in their community.
A lot of the work and passion that comes from the work that we do is based on like principles such as the principles of environmental justice, right? The principles of community air monitoring, right? Respecting, you know, the power that is built locally. We grew up with the Cesar Chavez family, and as these principles and techniques came up, it always took me back to my father had a small bookshelf, and he always had the Catholic Bible, a book that said Fred Ross Sr., a book of Gandhi. In our communities, it's always the community, it's always a union, it's always us solving an issue, right? Oil has been produced here for over 100 years. We have not only issues with groundwater, but we have the most polluted air in all of the U.S.
New details tonight on that Arvin gas leak that has displaced several residents for nearly 3 weeks now.
A nosotros no nos dieron ni siquiera una explicación de por qué era ni el condado ni la ciudad. Aquí los únicos que nos daban información era Gustavo y César. Venían y me llevaban con ellos a agarrar cempos con unas cubetas y agarrar cempos aquí, cempos allá para ver lo que estaba pasando. Y eran los únicos que nos informaban. Pero lo que es las autoridades nunca nos vinieron a informar y hasta la fecha nunca tuvimos una información de ellos de qué estaba pasando aquí.
Hemos tenido pleitos con petroleros, con las compañías de petróleo, con las compañías de pesticidas. Al principio nos teníamos como temerosas, ¿no? Pero con estos años de lucha ya no les tenemos miedo. O sea, ya para nosotros no es un poder grande para nosotros porque sabemos que nuestra voz cuenta.
I was working for SEIU, Local 250, on the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange hospital campaign. And here comes Fred, just this tall, thin guy. He was kind of like in the background. He sat and he was, you know, relatively quiet. And every so often he would pull out this little tattered book. The pages are really worn, and he would just read a quote. I was kind of like, it's a little bit strange. Like, what is this? I don't understand. After a while of like really just like listening to these, what I now know is something that came from his father out of the Axioms book, they were gems and they were very fitting for the situation. And I really began to lean into the things that he would say because I think they were just always really very connected to what was going on in the moment, you know. I was one of maybe 2 Black organizers in the union at the time. And one of the things that I think made me feel a real serious connection with him, and I always kind of like, whew, get a little emotional about it because It was a difficult place to organize as a Black organizer. You know, he named that. He named it at a time where people weren't really talking about racial justice issues like that. I felt it, but he said it. This was a hospital campaign, a new organizing campaign, so new workers trying to join a union, and the employer are sisters, they're nuns. They were really engaging in a boss fight, and we were trying to figure out exactly how do you fight nuns. This is when Fred comes in and begins to try to share with us the Catholic social teachings about living wage and around, you know, fairness and equality at work. So he went and talked to priests and other folks in the Catholic Church. Soon we had this coalition of folks that were really starting to challenge the sisters on their behavior. You know, you imagine the church being really super off limits, and he proved that that's not true. But there's also a super respectful way of challenging people, and you do it with their own values and with their own community. It was brilliant, and it is absolutely something that I use today. It's something that left a huge impression on me.
More than 3,000 teachers and other workers in the Oakland public school system have taken their labor strike into a second week. Schools remain open with office staffers supervising the roughly 34,000 students. Teachers are demanding not only better pay, but more rights to advocate for the needs of students.
The Oakland Education Association made a very intentional decision to fight for racial and social justice. We also are a part of Justice for Oakland Students Coalition, and together we knocked on doors and we phone banked a demographic of families that people haven't been investing in. I remember Fred would say, oh, well, if people aren't showing up, go get them. You know, we could call a family meeting, they just wouldn't show up. But when you went to their door, we learned so much.
What do we want? What do we want it?
And so when we did finally go out on strike and people hear the things that are important to them in demands that are gonna be ultimately in our contract, they supported us. So they did come out on the line.
Our big bargaining team is going to continue to work through the weekend, day, night, whatever it takes to try to...
We understand that we'll be back to fight for all the things that we really think are necessary to be able to sustain the work, to be able to properly educate students, for families to feel welcome and a part of the community.
Are you a dancer?
Part of what I will always appreciate Fred for is helping me really, really understand it's not just about worker power, it absolutely is, but we're connected with the community, that we're gonna do these things in a non-transactional way, and that we're gonna teach it to somebody else. What is it that Fred Sr. said? Social arsonists, right? Like lighting people on fire. It's like, look, this is what it's about.
Fred is what I would call a social justice pyromaniac. You know, his job was to set people's hearts and minds on fire, and then once he did that, direct that heat where it would do the most good to create the most change.
You don't have to go very far to find a cause to fight for, you know? You don't have to go very far to find injustices that you can help change if you want to.
You can read about history, you can talk about history, you can write about history, but when you do work in civic engagement, what you do is you make history. That's what Fred Ross taught us, how to make history.
So, good evening, everyone. This is the fourth time that I've seen this. And Fred Ross, his story just astounds me each time I watch it. He reminds me that change doesn't start with heroes, which is what we most often see in history books, what our kids see. And by then, it's almost too late because kids feel like I can never be as large as someone like Cesar Chavez or Martin Luther King. But Fred Ross reminds us that it starts with organizers. It starts with ordinary people who listen to each other, who build trust and help communities recognize their own power. And so that's what we're going to explore together tonight. What does organizing actually look like? What does it look like now? And where might we begin in our own communities? So before I bring up the panel, we're going to have a little bit of church. You know, in the Black community, we have a little bit of church. You're going to talk to your neighbor. You're going to turn around to your neighbor. I want you to turn to someone next to you and share one moment or a quote from the film that stuck with you. And I'll give you a minute to do that and then maybe share a couple. All right, let's do 30 more seconds of sharing.
Every active United.
If you need a program, you can pick one up. They're up at the front. If you're just getting here and you don't have a program, you can go ahead and pick one up. Robin has some for you. All right, let's come back together in whole group. I call this in the classroom, think, pair, share. So you thought about the film, you paired up with someone next to you, and now we're going to share. So are there a couple of folks in the audience that would like to share kind of a quote or something that stuck out to them? Oh, all the way in the back, yes.
Well, I mean, the observation was it takes hard work. You know, it takes hard work was the thing I took away from this because, and we were just sharing about so often right now the call to action is to give $5 on a reel, but that's not really what needs to happen. It's the door-to-door organizing that Fred Ross Sr. preached. So, and it takes hard work.
Thank you. We're going to meet some of these hard workers, these organizers, these 2026 organizers right now. So let's bring our panelists up and thank you for sharing. I'm going to keep the intro short so that we can get right into some conversation. I want to first bring up Sylvia Zapata, who is the executive director of the Student Action with Farmworkers, working alongside farm worker youth and families across North Carolina. Give Ms. Sylvia a hand. Next, I'm going to call up Melinda Wiggins, who is the Director of Labor South, who has spent decades training organizers and strengthening worker power across the South. Come on up, Melinda. And last, we're going to welcome John Heffernan, the executive producer of American Agitators, who helped bring Fred Ross's story to the screen. And just to remind you, my name is Cori Greer-Banks, and I am the director of Carolina K-12, which is a organization under Carolina Public Humanities, and I'll be guiding our conversation tonight. All right, I'm going to start with John. Yes, John. So can you tell us what first drew you to Fred Ross's story? He's not well known. I just learned about him watching this film. What drew you to his story and what surprised you as you begin constructing and making this film?
Sure. Is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. As Cori said, I'm John Heffernan, and I am actually based in Washington, D.C., and I want to first thank Chapel Hill Public Library for holding this event. Our goal is to get eyes on this film, so the more people that see it, the better. I'd also like to thank Lloyd Kramer for all his work in organizing this, and Molly as well. But most of all, I want to thank you all for being here. I was trained as an organizer by Fred as a 22-year-old Californian. And I learned those lessons that are in. Did everybody get the Book of Axioms? If not, please grab one on your way out. So I learned what it was like to organize. And although I didn't go on to organize in a traditional sense throughout my entire life, I've been a human rights advocate running initiatives and programs and organizations for the last 40 years. And it wasn't until Fred Jr. came to me shortly after January 26, and he said, now's the time to make a film about my dad, did I realize that I had employed so many of these techniques and these methodologies to the work that I had done over the last 40 years. The scenes that you see in the movie of Fred Sr. were filmed 30 years ago, obviously when he was still alive. So they had started to make this movie 30 years ago. For financial reasons, they had to stop. So it really wasn't until, again, shortly after January 6th when Fred said, okay, now's time to do it. And he said, John, you want to help me? And I said, well, I'm not a filmmaker. I've used film in my advocacy for many, many years, and I appreciate the value of film. But Fred was a hard person to say no to. And I also know the value of grassroots organizing. And I felt this is a time to inspire people to understand the value and the power of grassroots organizing, and that it is not a substitute for social media, that one-on-one, that getting buy-in from your community is critical. And that Fred was able to do this against the backdrop of Nazism, of fascism, of McCarthyism, you saw the shots of the KKK, of racism, and create that systemic change. And that's what I'm looking for, is that systemic change, not short-term fixes, but long-term fixes. And he largely did this through voter power. So I thought this was a crucial story that needed to be told. I think Dolores Huerta, who, as you saw there, who's, legendary, iconic. She's 95 years old, and she is so incredibly sharp even today. She said, bringing Fred's story to the screen is the medicine that this country needs right now. He empowered us to engage in the democratic process. When we were making this film, we didn't know what administration would be in power. In fact, we kind of assumed it'd be a Harris administration. But I got to tell you, this film resonates and is building interest on a minute-by-minute basis. It is more and more relevant today. And that's why I got engaged.
One thing that strikes me is how unglamorous organizing looks in this film. It's kind of slow, steady. You don't see the flashy headlines or the big glossy speeches. And so I want to bring it to Melinda and Sylvia. And in one sentence, how would you define organizing? We'll start with Sylvia. Sylvia, it looks like you have some thoughts.
It's curious because it's about how you connect to people. And it's the same thing that outreach workers do. It doesn't matter what you're going there to do. But I grew up as a migrant farm worker kid, and if it wasn't for outreach workers going out to find me wherever I was in my family, I would have fallen behind in school and my vaccines. So even though they might not consider themselves organizers, they were, because they were enabling, a community to not let their children fall behind.
Love that. What about you, Melinda?
This is fun. I was talking to a young organizer in Asheville recently, and something came up about the Mount Olive boycott and the pickle campaign, and I saw somebody who had worked on. I saw a few people who worked on that campaign with, and I was talking about how long the campaign was. It was like 5 years before it went public, and then another 5 years, and this young worker was like, just what are you talking about? That it took this long, and we're going to do a young worker training. And Ashley's like, young workers have got to hear this. They got to go in knowing it's a long game. It doesn't mean there's not successes along the way. And I love some of the things that were brought up in the film that I agree with. Relationship building, so key. You go with what you got. You do a house party. One person shows up. You don't know who that person's going to be. Look at her now. She's still organizing at 95. Sometimes you do organizing and only a few people show up, but you got to go with what you got. And then the process. I'm a trained popular organizer or popular education, and process is super important. And particularly, I'm loud, but I can. Oh, you can't hear me. Oh, the thing. Okay.
The online book.
I ain't gonna start over.
No.
But yeah, the process is super important. And I think when you're working and organizing, because the big wins are so few and far between, you have to acknowledge other kind of successes. And so the process, the relationship building, the camaraderie, the individual voice that farm workers or other workers find, super important. So an organizer sees that, celebrates that, honors process, and knows that it's a long game.
I have a follow-up question for all of you with that, because as an educator, when you look at young people who have gravitated so much toward instant gratification and that glossy, big instant win, how do you translate slow and steady and long game to young people where that doesn't translate to them in this instant gratification, social media, 10-second TikToks and Reels kind of world?
I think we've been having that conversation about the different generations. It seems like today I have 2 kids. My son is 16, he's about to be 17, and I have a daughter who's 12, and she's 13, she's about to be 14. And what I see in this generation is one of the things that I see with the push for wanting things faster is because our generations didn't push hard enough to get things done faster. So yes, things take time, but what we can see happen in the last year, how long did that take? How long did that take? So that's what this generation is saying, and what our generations, I'm an elder millennial, need to understand is that this generation, I see them as, I agree with the interpretation that they had about Ross, that he was igniting people's fire. But in my experience, we're already born with that. It's just we're socialized and it turns it off for us. But we already are born with that lean towards justice. We just become disconnected in this fallacy of individualism, which separates us not only from our community, but from ourselves. So it's that separation from ourselves and our own humanity that's at the core, which leads us to be so discompassionate and just matter of fact about the horrible things that are happening in front of us. I grew up in the Texas-Mexico border. Believe me, I would see children barefoot on the bridge when we would come visiting back from Mexico to Texas. And I became desensitized to that because at some point I felt like I'm poor too in the US, not Mexico poor, border poor, but it was that same kind of thing that gets turned off inside of you. So it's just reigniting that. And for me, this generation reminds me that we don't have to believe that things take that long, because if anything, what has happened in the last 16 months, in the last you know, before the second administration, things have happened so quickly that it's a fallacy that things take so long.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. John, what do people often misunderstand about organizing that you think this film helps to clarify?
I think it sort of gets to the point we were just talking about before, particularly nowadays, where there is this dependency on short-term fixes that's perpetuated by social media. And I think what this film shows, even though this organizing, most of the film or a good portion of the film, you know, happened 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, you can see these accomplishments. You can see what happened again against some really challenging circumstances. And there's nothing more, I think, hopeful than that message for particularly young people to see that can be done. And it doesn't need, social media is great in terms of emphasizing the message, but that kind of buy-in, that kind of relationships developed is key toward that long-term fix. And you'll see, and I think it's really important to celebrate those little wins because it's a long process. And none of us would be here today if we didn't, you know, have something keep us going. And for me, it's those little wins, but in the end, it's also realizing that it is a long process. And it does take that hard work that John talked about there. And one of the axioms that I appreciate more than anything is that there are no shortcuts. That a lot of that work, a lot of that groundwork, you know, this is why it's called grassroots organizing, is necessary in order to affect this, what I call these systemic changes, that systems that need to change to create this long-term effect.
Thank you, John. So speaking of long-term, Melinda, you have trained organizers across the South for decades. You've done a long time. Look, I'm not giving any numbers, but you've been doing it a while, okay? So what skills do you think separate effective organizers from well-meaning activists?
Well, I think I was going to say something that tied to both what the previous conversation about the slow and steady. I'm not really a purporter of slow and steady. I think it's fast and steady. Like Sylvia said, we can do a lot, and I'm a very impatient person. And I'm in it for the long haul. And I think you can hold those two things. I think you can be impatient and be sick of people saying wait and like, you know, next year. We don't have to stand for that. And I'm in it for the long run. So I'm going to see what we do next year. But I think fast and steady.
I like that. Fast and steady.
So that's one of the things I think, you know. I think the other thing I'll just say, you know, with the work of Labor South, we are trying to bring in the history of organizing in the South and really educate ourselves, not just about sort of the big sweeping movements and organizing that we know, but also go granular. So supporting workers to understand what's happened in their local communities. And so I think good organizers bring that in. We got to know our history. And the South is the place where we have demonstrated we can build a social movement. We need to learn from that. We need to teach other people that. So I think good organizers know the history and apply it, or facilitate workers to do their own analysis about how does history play out now and how does it help us dealing with, again, another authoritarian sort of I'll say still anti-communist sort of communities. How do we apply the learnings and successes that have come before us right now?
Thank you. Sylvia, for you, what part of Ross's approach feel most alive in your current work with farm worker youth and families?
It's the contact. It's going to where people are. When our students who, like, when I was an intern, Melinda was the director at Student Action with Farmworkers, and I hadn't stepped foot in a farm worker camp since I was a teenager, which before then had been many years since I was a kid and spent half my life there. But going in there from a different position, from being a farm worker to being there to advocate and get information so that we could throw this Tri-County health fair here in North Carolina back in 2001 was major. So it is going to where they are. That's the most basic thing, because assuming that people have transportation to go places, that comes from a place of privilege that, you know, people can just take the time off and go anywhere. So if you're trying to connect with anyone, is meeting them where they are and definitely listening to understand and not listening to respond. And that applies to any kind of relationship that you have, whether it's the students forming relationships with farm workers. Some of the students are like me from farm worker backgrounds and some aren't, but it's just the basis of how to connect with people just on the human level. That is the basic thing that we do. We share a meal. They do a theater. They do a play, and the farm workers get to learn about some of the initiatives that we have, whether it be, you know, heat protections or labor rights or COVID and, you know, vaccination confidence or things like that. So it is really just on how important and how vital it is to be able to reconnect with people. So I think social media for a lot of the youth, and even for myself as a millennial, I really love, because I get to see what everybody else is doing, and it helps me remain inspired of what's possible. But it's not an either or, it's a both and thing. And at the same time, we are living our lives every day, and just being able to have that connection with other people means that we have to move towards engagement and not disengaging from our neighbors.
I want to keep on this train of connection and engaging with neighbors. One thing that stuck out to me was that Ross grew up not really integrated with people from different cultures, different races, but yet he leaned into that. And so, Melinda, when I was reading up about you, you grew up in segregated Mississippi. Wow. And you're an organizer.
After integration,
Yeah.
officially.
And so as I was watching that film, and Ross grew up fairly insulated in San Francisco, you two had very different childhoods in California and Mississippi, but your path led you to cross-racial organizing and that connection. So tell us, how did your upbringing shape the way you think about solidarity and coalition building today? Because it sounds like with both of you, that is what is key, is that relationship and crossing those boundaries. How did you do that?
Yeah, I think now that you're kind of laying out this, the community I grew up in was majority Black in the Delta, and it was segregated, and it was insular. So like Ross, it was a very insular community. How'd I get out? I got out because my family said from early on, you get out of the Delta. And it was because they were working class. They had a hard life. I come from a sharecropping family, and they, you know, my dad would hardly even talk to me about his experiences working in the field. And he would just say, it was too hard. It's too hard. And so they put my entire family, a lot of energy and resources into me getting out. And I am the one person in my family, extended family, who got out of the Delta. Then they wanted me to come back, but we're still negotiating.
Well, I want to keep on with that. You got out, but you come back, and you come back fighting for them. Like,
I mean, everything I do is because of what I learned from my parents. You know, I heard, even though there were no unions where I grew up, my mom worked in the same factory for 50 freaking years, made less than $10 an hour when she had to leave her job. And, you know, I heard all the time about the man and had a very strong working class identity. And I think I just didn't quite understand. I got a lot of mixed messages. I didn't quite understand this idea of like fighting together with other workers and racism at the same time. And I learned both. And I had to sort all that out. I've spent my life sorting all that out. It takes a lot to sort through that. As white people, we learn so much messed up stuff about privilege and relationships. Thankfully, again, I will attribute this to my mom, even though very conservative, was non-conventional. And that allowed her to allow me all kinds of space. And then I had some great mentors in college. And when I got to Durham, who gave me, again, this space to be unconventional, to think countercultural. And I think when you have, I mean, for me, I just really identified with being working class. I saw my family see my family suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And I am able to translate, and I think everyone can, that and have empathy
Mm-hmm.
for other people who face other forms of discrimination and prejudice. So it didn't feel hard, it felt necessary.
Oh, I love that line. Right. So let's take it to North Carolina 2026. We're going through a couple of challenges. So I'm going to start with John. If Fred Ross were organizing, yes, it is trivia time. No, I'm just playing. If Fred Ross were organizing in North Carolina in 2026, where would he start?
I think he'd first start by listening. And I think there's no more important lesson for me in the film than the power of listening that I think we've lost a lot of in our world. We have so many different tools to speak and to have our voices be heard that I think it sort of overcomes and it displaces the importance of listening. I think he'd find out, who were the leaders in the communities. I think he, as it was emphasized in the movie, he was very effective at building coalition. There's no better tool than to combat whether it's racism or whatever than building that kind of solidarity that's needed out there. I think he would then find the leaders in those various sectors and bring them together. And I think he would find out what people need and what people care about more than anything. And that's all part of the whole Fred Ross listening technique.
Sylvia, it's your turn. All right. What do you think is an issue right now that needs organizers and not just awareness? We're speaking a lot about social media, and yes, that does bring awareness, but what's an issue right now that needs something more?
Well, I can definitely tell you farm worker justice is we need more people to understand what role we play as consumers and how that ends up impacting people. Just this year, in this administration, there was a rule that was signed to decrease the hourly wages of visa holding farm workers who come here, H-2A workers who come here for a certain period of time with a visa to work in our tobacco fields, in our sweet potato fields, and now they're going to get paid several dollars less an hour. And on top of that, if that weren't enough, now the farmers can actually charge them rent for the deplorable living conditions that they're in. I don't know if y'all realize this, but some of these farm worker camps still have outhouses. And the outhouses that I've seen are in the middle of the sun or like high, tall grass. So can you imagine when it rains, they have to go out there slipping and sliding, which is the stories that I've heard from them, that they're like running to go to the bathroom in this outhouse. Nobody should have outhouses, not even farm workers. So when it comes to farm worker justice, that's something that all of us have a vested interest in, because we all eat food. We all eat food. We all benefit from them being here and generating income for our communities. They shop in our grocery stores, and it's only temporarily here that they're here.
these farm workers. There's less here in North Carolina, but there's still some farm worker families like mine. But my farm worker families like mine were replaced by H-2A workers because that's your captive worker. My family, whenever they didn't get paid by the grower, they sued them and they left. They left and they sued them and they won. And they won because they had a lawyer who had also worked in the fields and who was, if you ever question your impact, just know this, the attorney that helped my parents win the case in the state of Washington, he actually was working for the UFW and was the person that helped establish UFW in the state of Washington. So he was touched by Cesar Chavez's work, and then he in turn brought justice to a lot of families who were being exploited in the Yakima Valley in the state of Washington. So when it comes to farm worker justice, we're always going to need organizers. And right now, I'm just a plug, if you know of any college age students who would be interested in doing our paid 10-week summer internship, the application is still open at saf-unite.org. And yeah, that's one way that you could become involved. Thank you. Speaking of new organizers, young ones, going to Melinda, what's one mistake that new organizers commonly make?
I don't know. I'm still back 2 questions before. That I'll answer this and I'll say something about that. We talked earlier about being impatient, and I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think sometimes just the not honoring the small wins.
Okay.
They want the big wins sometimes, like, can we get the contract? Let's go on strike. Let's do the big boycotts. And organizing, that's like so little part of it all, right? And then sort of the day-to-day and the small meetings and the one-on-ones and then the not winning the contract and then another, and then not winning the second. And, it's like, but I think honoring those small wins. I want to say one thing in response to what he would do. I think Ross would be so happy about what's going on in the triangle.
Oh, yes.
I mean, we can list all the workers organizing, a lot of young workers organizing right now. REI, Starbucks, Amazon, Waffle House, teachers, grad students. There is so much organizing happening right here, right now, and we need to support them. So he would be like, I'm done here. I'm going to go somewhere else. Y'all got it covered, because there's just so much organizing and support for organizing in the triangle now.
Thank you for that. Now, now you've brought me back to that question. Okay. North Carolina is this wonderful at-will state that does not really like unions that much.
Least unionized state.
Yeah, in the country.
Checked in the country.
Crazy. So, speaking of, Ross giving us a pat on the back for what we're doing now, but what else would he tell us to do?
I don't think he would give you a pat on the back. Because I knew him. I was 23 years old when I was trained by this guy, and he was tough.
Oh.
And I don't know whether that came across in this film, but it was all about follow-up, and it was about, you're just constantly out there, and it's about perseverance, and he wouldn't say stop.
Yes.
He'd say keep on going. He'd be, as Eliseo said, he'd be encouraging, but you knew that you needed to get to that finish line, and sometimes that finish line is not even in sight.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that he wouldn't, appreciate everything that's going on, but it's those big wins are really, really tough.
Thank you. Yeah. We're going to turn it to you guys, because I don't know if you did your homework, but you had a little column at the end that said panel discussions, questions I would like to ask. Maybe you wrote down a question that you want to ask the panel. Maybe you had a reaction to the film, but I want to turn it to you. Oh, somebody did their homework. I like this. All right. We have some questions. Molly, do you want to work the room?
I will, and then I'm going to trade off with Robin. I'm assuming, Robin, you've got some questions online from our online folks as well.
Okay.
So I'm gonna start at the back.
We'll start at the
Right
back and come up to the front. Molly's in charge. I'll make sure she comes up front.
Hi, thank you. I'm Karen. I've got like 3 questions, but I'll just pick one for now and then maybe someone will hit one of mine. I do want to know about the youth organizing. When I was canvassing, we were all old people. And I did not see a lot of that. So what you said made me feel a lot better. So I'd love to know what you are seeing, our young people organizing, and what is that looking like? And if there's anything we need to do to reach them, what do we need to do? So it's kind of a multifaceted question. Do you want to start?
Yeah. One of the things that really excites me about this generation is that they want to be given the resources and then they want to take the wheel. And I think that everybody wants to do that. But I really think that when we struggle to connect with a certain audience or with a certain issue, I like to try things. They may not always land, but they deserve the opportunity to try different things. And we've actually had college students who have their own groups that they started at like NC State or the different universities, and they reach out to us. It's not an assignment. Nobody made them do it on their own about how they can be connected to the work. On another end, I'm a political science major, and one of the things that I know, which I agree with Ross, is the importance of our duty to civic life. And that involves voting and understanding how our government works. So for our students that participate in our academic year leadership development program, in the last election in November, we actually got a grant to host 2 safe sites. And these are students that are first generation Americans who really couldn't look to their parents to see what voting would look like. And they got to witness other people taking time off, going to early vote, and see what that was like. And we did 2 days, and it was both the students that were high school students that joined us, some alumni who were college students, and some of the parents of the high school students who were there to witness this and make sure that people were comfortable while waiting in line and that things were going right. And that's how we got them engaged, by saying, hey, this is something that, especially for Latinx youth right now, them going door to door is probably not going to happen right now. I wouldn't recommend that. The way that things are going with Latinos, a birth certificate is not going to help you right now. So just keep things within context. But I would say that the youth are interested in it. They just want the opportunity to be able to do it in a way that is accessible to them, and that they can also take the reins and aren't just always following or being told what to do. Thank you. Who do we have next? Oh, okay. We have someone up front that has a question.
I've got
Oh.
2 folks back here. Let's keep them quick.
I'm gonna.
So anybody interested in canvassing or phone banking, there's an organization here called Team Up NC. It used to be Neighbors on Call and County to County. Please don't be afraid of doing that. You can go with somebody who's experienced. You don't have to say anything, but just get involved. There's other things you can do. Get involved with your local Democratic Party, and you can do things. Now is the time, because if you're afraid to canvass, fascism is a lot scarier.
Well, that deserves a thank you. Fascism is a lot.
Can I just add something to Molly real quickly? What we tried to do with this film is to show that you don't need to be Fred Ross, the Cesar Chavez or Dolores Huerta, that anybody can organize, and whether that's for social justice or whether that's for a stop sign at the end of the street, that there are certain techniques and certain methodologies that have proven to work. So that's our goal here.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Sylvia and anybody else, my question is probably primarily to you. I'm a retired attorney. My first job out of law school was at Farmworkers Legal Services of North Carolina. So there I met people like Ngaza Laughing House, Jim Grant, Steve Edelstein, but also going out to farm labor camps, and seeing and witnessing how people were basically this concept of slavery by another name. By the time they got to those camps, they were already in debt. They could never leave because you always owed the farmer money. And the crew bosses had pit bulls and all other kinds of weapons, and these camps were located way off the main road, usually near some wooded area. And so my question is, how much has that changed? And we try to bring lawsuits, but quite often, by the time the season ended, the clients were gone back in the stream, and you have to have clients for depositions and all that sort of thing. So has things changed or things improved now? Because this was, like I said, 79, 80, 81. I'm hoping 40 years later, things have gotten better.
When it comes to agriculture, I wish I could say that things have moved as fast as in other places. But in terms of, there being dogs and things like that, maybe not as much. I've not run into that, but definitely abuses, people not being paid correctly, sexual harassment in the fields, especially for farm worker women or women who work in any type of agriculture. Men included, but mostly women. Our partners at It's Our Future and El Futuro Es Nuestro is another one of our organizations that work with farm workers. And thank you, Molly, for that warning. Everybody's calm. Yeah. They've worked with Legal Aid of North Carolina to see justice for women who have been inappropriately fired. So yes, justice continues. It could definitely be a lot faster and a lot more solid. And that's with everybody understanding that agriculture reform is only going to happen if we demand that from our legislators.
I'll add, we made a documentary 50 years after Harvest of Shame. Do you remember the documentary came out in 1960, aired on Thanksgiving Day? Edward R. Murrow was the announcer. It showed the conditions. 50 years later, we created a documentary called Harvest of Dignity that does a little comparison to say, here's what's changed over the last 50 years and here's what hasn't. I think it's still on SAF's website, but you can Google it and see it. And it goes into the nuances of what's changed and what's the same.
I belong to an organization that in the 70s declared, it was a national organization that declared lettuce picked by oppressed workers, farm workers, unkosher. Do you think that it would be effective if we boycotted sweet potatoes? And I also want to ask John, it seems to me that all of you, that community organizing is almost by definition decentralized. To what degree do you think we also, on top of that, need a single national leader to unify all these disparate groups, which, when separated, don't have the the power to bring about change? It's when we're unified that we bring change about.
So I want to make sure that I'm listening to you correctly. So it sounds like we need a connector, a unifier to drive forth coalitions to all of these separate groups that are out here in this country to be unified, working toward a larger goal together.
Yeah, I mean, look at Iran. Look at Tahrir Square. The Arab Spring. It didn't happen because it was disorganized. Look what King did. Look what with the Peace Corps. Franklin Roosevelt, what he did with a powerful leader.
So we have two questions. First, the sweet potato.
Well, I think you just answered the question.
Yeah. Definitely boycott sweet potatoes. There was a farm worker that died who was run over by a sweet potato truck here in the last 6 months here in North Carolina. And that is the second death that happens to this grower that happened in the premises of this particular grower in North Carolina. You can Google it. But farm workers die every year from just bad practices in the fields. I feel like Chick-fil-A workers get more training and more protection than farm workers do. And that's not that one should have more than the other. It's just that it's doable. So yes, if we're going to do anything, boycotts definitely work. As you know, the history of Cesar Chavez and the Great Boycott and the Mount Olive boycott, which I got to participate in when I first came to North Carolina. But just becoming knowledgeable and then also seeing who's behind not doing anything when it comes to agricultural reform here in North Carolina. And the coalitions, John?
Yeah, I mean, I call it collective counterpower, right? I mean, to me, whatever the issue is, if you can bring folks together, sure, if you have a national leader that can play a role in unifying all these, otherwise sort of diverse groups, that's great. And we've seen it. We've seen it with Martin Luther King. We've seen it with Bobby Kennedy to a certain extent. We saw it with JFK. We saw it with Roosevelt. But I think it's really, really hard to come by, and we can't wait for that person. So I think that, it could be a collection of persons, but I think that the idea of collective counterpower with leaders and all these disparate groups coming together can be achieved without, it'd be great if we had that leader, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. So we can't wait for it.
I'm not sure it's ever happened. I mean, all that we know those folks and how they're lifted up and presented, but it's always been many organizers behind all of that. So I don't need a great white, whatever, and even Cesar Chavez gets all the credit for UFW. God love him, God rest in peace. He deserved. But Dolores Huerta co-founded UFW with him. She's still doing the organizing at 95. So it's never one person. I think they serve as a role, but we create that. Right. We create that focus on a person. The organizers, rank and file worker leaders, they're the ones. That's what we need. We need a mass mobilization, a social movement of many leaders, many organizers, many unions, many churches, many organizations coming together.
I want to make sure, do we have any online questions, Robin? No?
There is one that came in online. Hasn't the duopoly, both major parties, shown to be ineffective, demonstrated by 40% of the US not voting and independent registrants outnumbering party registrations both in North Carolina and nationwide? Doesn't action have to precede good laws, or will that action happen?
The people that haven't voted are generally the ones who don't vote. It didn't matter which election it was. So it is everybody realizing that it is all our collective responsibility to participate in a system that we're a part of. Because if we don't participate, we're still participating. It's just somebody else is getting a say. So I believe that, it is just realizing that there's no opting out of this.
I'd like to ask a question about Minneapolis. Has there been a organization group that's kind of helped to force all of the demonstrations and protests, or was it the two murders that really pushed that forward? Because there seems to be some forward momentum there. But has there been a organization trying to organize people in Minnesota?
There's been a collection of unions organizing together for years, and specifically trying to think about a general strike in Minneapolis. And so I think the murders, people were already ready. And last year, now I'm forgetting when it was, maybe May, they did a week-long action. Do y'all remember? I don't know if it got traction here, but a week-long walkout actions, all these unions together with the state AFL-CIO, with the Central Labor Council in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So it's been building, which is part of what, we need to keep. So it's been building for years. And then last year they sort of demonstrated their power in this week-long action. And now I think people were already talking to each other and communicating with each other, and it was ready. I mean, maybe George Floyd's murder sparked some of that initial coordination and collaboration and like, hey, we can't do this alone. But it is something that folks are looking at nationally in terms of unions working together on something, which they don't always do well.
It also seems like the phone, the video camera on the phone has sped things up tremendously and has made huge strides in justice being served, or at least the murders can be broadcast now. Before,
And I think John has a thought that he wants to
No,
contribute.
I was on something else before we end because I'm looking at the times.
Oh.
But yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, why don't you finish your thought? Mhm.
The value of
like, the camera on the phone has really been a game changer.
Mhm.
Yes.
On the
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before you said
Agreed.
No, it doesn't apply to us. We can finish up.
before it was so easy just to say it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And they're even telling us that now.
Yeah.
When you see it,
Yeah.
it didn't happen that way. It seems like you're talking about change is slow, but this has been a really fast
Yeah.
moving technology that really helps.
Yeah.
Great observation. So Molly, I know we have a time check. We have time for one more question. Mhm.
Well, I just want to build on what some of these last remarks have suggested, that I think there is some mobilization that we're seeing around the country right now, that's increasing in a hurry. And in fact, with a call for a general strike tomorrow, I think starting in Minneapolis, but around the country. I understand that in Tucson, the schools are declared closed tomorrow because so many of the teachers are planning on not showing for work. So there's the work stoppage. I, for one, will not be shopping tomorrow. That's one small way of participating.
Yeah.
There's also just the announcement of the next No Kings protest, which is March 28th. And I think probably some of us here participated in the first two, which were the biggest mass protests in U.S. history. And this one is likely to be considerably larger. So just to say that these are ways, there are so many different points of entry, I think, into forms of activism and labor activism and union activism, but I think, small groups is often where this becomes most evident and builds.
Yeah, and tomorrow the action in Chapel Hill, I think, is at 2:30, and in Durham is at 1 at the main plazas, at the respective plazas.
Florence, I want to thank you of reminding us that change is indeed happening, and these separate groups that are happening in different parts of the country are in fact unifying in ways that maybe we don't even recognize. So in closing, I keep thinking of Ross, and I keep thinking that Fred, he did not wait for a perfect moment, and he was not a flashy person. He didn't care about titles. He started with people. John, you kept saying the word listen, and that rang out to me when I was watching that film, that listening and building trust is tantamount, whether it's during World War II, the Great Depression, or the mess we're in right now. So it's one conversation at a time, one person at a time. We can't forget that. So my hope is that tonight, that we leave inspired, that we leave a little hopeful, that we leave recognizing that there are in fact things happening and we need to keep going. And I want to thank you all for being here tonight and caring just enough to show up on this cold night. And it's going to be even colder this weekend, but it feels warm in here. So give yourself a round of applause.
And can I just shout out what a fabulous job Cori did all the way through. So thank you so much for your care and dedication, Cori. You are the best.
And one last shout out, if anybody's interested in screening the film, please contact me or anybody up here. We also have a curriculum on our website for middle school and high school, and we
Yes.
are developing
If there are teachers in this room, there's a curriculum on the website. I'm gonna send it out to the teachers, my
Great.
Carolina K-12 posse right in here. I'll send you the curriculum for this. And I think you said, John, May 1st,
First will be the official release, and then it will appear in art theaters throughout the country, and then eventually on a streamer.
So we'll
But
make
we
sure you
need
get that.
eyes on this film. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And pick up an axiom and lessons for organizers.
Oh. I grew up in South Texas. Thank you.
Oh, Mission? Yeah, I know, Mission. It's called Mission McAllen, Brown, like Brown's. Really? Wow. Oh, wow. Well, it's, I don't know when the last time you did there, but you would recognize it. It is, I don't even recognize it. That's great. That's real You know what? That comes from
You know, these people backing up chair. Yeah.
I did want to hear some amazing your intern in case you have. Thank you. Yeah. Family, so